O.J. Simpson has been released from a Nevada prison. He left a short while ago on parole after serving 9 years of a 9 to 33-year sentence for kidnapping and armed robbery. The former U.S. football star is best known for a different criminal case. In 1995, he was found not guilty of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman in Los Angeles. That was a trial that riveted the United States for many, many months.
So, Dad, why was this orange juice guy so riveting anyways?
Well, his name, Molly, was O.J. Simpson, and the world was captivated by his courtroom trial back in 1995.
For me, seeing a real courtroom drama unfold on live TV was something that never used to be.
You could say it was the first reality show of the time.
From what it sounds, it may have taken some conflict and compromise for the use of cameras to become more accepted.
Actually, our state of Florida took on some of those controversies head on to pave the way for cameras in the court to become more common.
It was in 1937 when the American Bar Association adopted rules to ban electronic media in all courtrooms. This was because the prevailing thoughts were electronic media coverage of any kind distracted from the dignity of judicial proceedings. This ban remained in place until the 1970s. An exception in Texas allowed for a 1962 television broadcast of the Billy Estes trial and conviction. Estes challenged his conviction all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, contending that the presence of cameras deprived him of a fair trial. The Supreme Court overturned Estes' conviction on the basis of his civil rights being violated. The justices listed many problems with having cameras in the court, including the impact on the jurors. And the Estes Court held that there was no First Amendment right to broadcast from the courtroom. However, the court also recognized the importance and rights of citizens to be informed as well. It stated that, in the light of evolving technology, an absolute ban on cameras may not always be necessary. The court explicitly left the door open for a future examination of cameras in the courtroom. That door was pushed open a little more when a news organization, Post Newsweek, petitioned the Florida Supreme Court in 1975 for a compromise in having the prohibition of television court coverage removed. Ultimately, this idea was rejected, but the court did offer a compromise: experiments using some smaller video equipment in order to re-examine the rules. However, it also required participants to agree to allow the cameras. This caused additional conflict in finding willing participants. Then, in June 1977, the court authorized a 1-year pilot program that would allow cameras in courtrooms. This involved asking all participants to describe their experience of having courtroom cameras. Following this experimental year, the courts examined the effects of electronic media in Florida's courts. They surveyed more than 2,750 judges, attorneys, jurors, and witnesses. The results were predominantly positive. On the basis of that survey, the Florida Supreme Court compromised once again, this time opening the doors of all Florida courts to electronic media without any consent required. The first trial to be televised during the experimental year took place in October 1977 and involved Ronnie Zamora. 15-year-old Zamora was accused and found guilty of shooting to death his 85-year-old neighbor in Miami Beach, Florida. Gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial proceedings was broadcasted in Florida by a public television station and across the U.S. The judge in the case said, "The presence of television and audio equipment at Zamora's trial did not cause any physical disruptions, and they did not interfere with the jurors' ability to consider the testimony." In 1981, 2 Miami Beach police officers challenged their convictions, arguing that camera coverage had violated their constitutional right to a fair and impartial trial. This case is known as Chandler v. Florida. The Chandler Court held that the Estes decision did not establish a blanket rule that electronic media coverage automatically violates the Constitution. Further, because of technological advances since Estes, states now should be permitted to allow cameras in courtrooms. The Chandler Court stated that criminal defendants must show actual prejudice to their constitutional rights before cameras can be banned. Since this important Florida case over Chandler's Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial was brought all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, it settled any further conflict over the media's First Amendment access to the courts. Florida's compromise developed through the Post-Newsweek challenge and the one-year experiment. It led to an open access for cameras in courtrooms throughout our land. Then, in 1997, Florida continued to take the lead in the use of cameras in the courtrooms by allowing them to have live video of the Florida Supreme Court chambers. This move once again proved to be useful for judges and the public in general.
It really is a great opportunity for us to have a recording of it and for the public to see it.
Nobody could have guessed that this lens into electronic media and the law would be the focus of the upcoming presidential election. The 2000 election between George Bush and Al Gore was a different conflict that was so close that the deciding votes came down to a few ballots here in the state of Florida. And until those ballots were figured out, the whole world was waiting to see who the next president of the U.S. would be.
And the fact that we were allowed to see our Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, as it deliberated and debated this critically important issue was stunning to most of the reporters, particularly those from foreign countries and those who cover the federal courts, where you don't have this level of access.
This intense media coverage surrounding the Bush-Gore decision had raised the profile of the entire court system. So much so that Americans were now keenly aware of them. This made the courtroom a new part of America's living room. A network was even created to watch live courtroom dramas unfold. It was reality and theater on the same station. Even if it once required some compromise, that started here in Florida. Studies showed over and over that cameras helped educate the public about how court systems worked. Ironically enough, Florida's compromise of allowing cameras in courtrooms has led to other famous, or maybe infamous, court cases that took place here in Florida. Convicted murderer Ted Bundy captivated national viewers during his trial as he handled his own defense. The famous Kennedy nephew had the nation tuned into a West Palm Beach courtroom with the accuser's face covered with a blue dot. More recently, Casey Anthony was accused of murdering her daughter. This also attracted a national audience to watch the real-life drama unfold.
Molly, did you know that even though Florida has led the way, the U.S. Supreme Court does not allow cameras in the courtroom? Communication professor Robert Harmon spoke of the risk of courtroom cameras. He said, the more trial appears to be the scene of public controversy or theater, the less legitimate it will appear. As opposed to the ban on cameras in the 1930s, the prevailing thought today is that transparency in the court system leads to greater confidence from the public. In the opinion of an article I read in the New Yorker, the public really benefited from watching the victims testify against the doctor of the USA gymnast. Now talk about riveting.
Yeah, what journalists might call transparency could make it hard to find an unbiased jury or affect the testimony of witnesses.
That's true, Pops, but we are also a free society. And when information is kept from us, we tend to doubt our government when we don't have that information. We have also benefited from technology that has advanced so much since the 1930s, making cameras less of a distraction in courts from even the 1981 Florida Chandler case. And Florida also continues to find ways to compromise new prevailing technologies. By declaring it a release in January 2018, the Florida Supreme Court will now begin live broadcasting of its proceedings on Facebook. Hope you enjoyed!